Okay.
Yes, Manu, you can go first. Yeah.
Yes, Manu, please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, good afternoon, everyone in Vietnam. Good morning for people in France, and maybe good night if there is people in America. So welcome to the GEM webinar series. The session today is titled Climate and Adaptation in Vietnam, Contribution from an Environmental History of Vietnam. To address this issue, we have the pleasure to welcome Dr. Frederic Thomas, historian of science and technology at the French National Research Institute for Sustainable Development, and Dr. Duc Liem, vice chair and also historian, lecturer and researcher at the Hanoi National University of Education, and vice chair of the Department of World History at the Hanoi National University of Education. So the presentation are based on the second chapter of the COP26 GEMS special reports delivered to the Monterey, Vietnam, for the COP26 conference in Glasgow. We have also the pleasure to have two discussants, Professor Philippe Lefayet, historian at the French School of Asian Study, EFEO, and Dr. Duc Liem, climatologist and physician at the University of Science and Technology of Hanoi. So thank you very much for the two discussants to be here today. And thank you for all the attendees to join the seminar today. I give now the floor to Frederic Thomas to introduce the session, and after Liem and Frederic will present the paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you very much. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody in Vietnam. First of all, I would like to thank Etienne, Emmanuel, and Lingha for the organization of this brilliant seminar, which aim at building a resilient transition strategy for Vietnam to face climate change. So, of course, for me and for many historians, this is a very big challenge that goes beyond individual action, but as collective action can do a lot. We are very happy if our modest contribution of historians do this effort can be useful. Our effort can be useful. Sorry. I also thank Professor Tang from USTH and Philippe Lefayet from French School of Oriental Studies to have accepted to play the difficult task of discussing in the same spirit, and I hope our discussion will be fruitful. So I give the floor to Liem now to make a presentation. Our session, will be organized, I think, in 4 times. Liem from Hanoi University of Education will first go over the climatic and environmental data found in the Imperial archives on the question historians face in interpreting and using these data. In a second step, I will complete this historiographical reflection. I will show that it is possible to quickly set up interdisciplinary research between climatologists and climate historians, perhaps by focusing on the colonial period. We will discuss about this. In the third part, Professor Duc Liem from USTH will discuss the expectations that climatologists and atmospheric physicists like him may have from historians. And finally, in the fourth part, I will give the floor to Philippe Lefayet to return to the richness of the Imperial annals in terms of climatic and environmental data on the methodological challenge of using this information with the instrument of contemporary science. Finally, we will invite all the participants to the floor to discuss in a general discussion of the role of historian in this big challenge that I present quickly. So, Liem, Dr. Liem, please, can you continue?
So can you guys see the screen? Is that okay?
Yes, that's okay.
Yes, it's perfect.
Okay. So, good afternoon from Hanoi. First of all, I would like to thank the Friend Development Agency for the great opportunity to bring scholars from different perspectives and different backgrounds. I think this is a great gathering for people to understand, Vietnam environments and the challenge, not about the future, not only about the future, but also the contemporary. And, by looking back at the history of the environment of Vietnam, I think we can get a lot of good material, experience and lesson that can apply to further our understanding and further our exploring of the challenge that Vietnam is coming to face in the coming decades. Let me start with the presentation. I will talk about three the main issue. The first one, we talk about why we study environmental history in Vietnam. The second thing, we talk about the history of the environment in Vietnam between the 13th and 19th centuries, and finally, I suggest some implications on the relationship between environment and nature and human society in Vietnam, and how we can move forward from there. Now, why study environment history in Vietnam? By the way, I got 15 minutes. I will try to make it short, and I believe Philippe Lefebvre will come back and he will illustrate or elaborate a lot of material and a lot of data, which I'm talking right now. So I think we have more time to discuss about the pre-colonial Vietnam archive and then the material and documents later on. Why study environmental history in Vietnam? I think it is very important because today the study of environment, of climate change, and environmental challenge is increasingly significant due to the needs, the agency of the subject, I think. However, most people in the field, economic and climatologists and so on, people mostly focus on contemporary and make a scenario for the future perspectives, and very few people actually look back at the history, look back at the past, look back into the pattern of the past and see what kind of information, what kind of understanding we can learn from the past, and therefore I believe the understanding of the past environmental history is so significant, and it was underestimated, it was understudied in the social science and communities. So first, we all know that the significance of presenting, the human history of climate and environment. We have a lot of data, we have a lot of information and a lot of research about a natural history of climate and nature and environment, but very few actually, until very recently, especially in the 20th century, that social scientists and scholars starting digging up the archive and digging up the materials that leading to the new understanding of human history with regard to climate and environments. And the most important thing is we're trying to understand how past society perceive and record and dealing with the fluctuation of climate and the nature hazards, how they adapt, how they deal, how they negotiate, how they sometimes how they try to overcome natural challenge and all kind of activity, all kind of attitude, all kind of effort was valuable experience of the human society that I think a contemporary society can look back and learn something from the past. Now, for Vietnam, we all know that Vietnam is among the countries that the most affected by climate change. Also, we have a long tradition and the richness of human and nature relationship and human experience in dealing with the nature. We have, if we look at the map of Vietnam, we look from the north to the south. The environment is so diverse, and a different human community have engaged, have negotiated, have adapt with different kind of terrain and environments. So I think that's kind of diversity, that's kind of nature and human interaction that give us a lot of experience, give us a lot of material when we look at different way, different mechanism and different form, different structure and different experience of human nature interaction in the past. And therefore, I think it is very important to look at the pattern, look at the experience, look at the knowledge that the Vietnamese people, how they deal, how they engage, how they interact with nature, with the climate, with the natural calamities in the past. If you look at Vietnam today, you look at the Red River Delta area, you look at the Lower Mekong and the Central Highlands, they all put under threat by climate change, put under threat by natural challenge, storm, flood, and climate change, and drought, and so on, and so forth. And therefore, it is an agency for scholars in Vietnam, not only people who study climatology, who study natural science, but also history and economic and different fields from social science and humanity, to study and to look at the knowledge, the opportunity to have Vietnam then overcome the coming challenge of climate change. Let me give you one more example here. The Lower Mekong. You look at the map over there, over here. During the last 300 years, the Lower Mekong was among the most humans interactions, the area that have a huge project of human interaction with the nature. It's starting from 17th, 18th century, then Vietnamese and Chinese and Khmer and the Cham starting migrated into that region, and huge project of hydraulic digging out lake and dyke and river was manufactured. And then you have French colonialism, when people came with the machine in the late 19th century, early 20th century, that a huge project of colonial infrastructure that bring this part of the world to be one of the biggest rice exporter in the world. And it all comes from, the way human interact with nature, the way human beings design and overcome a natural challenge. But you look at the map on the top over there. This is a scenario of 2050, where most of the region will submerge under the seawater. So that kind of challenge will give us a very important indication that Vietnamese people on the past have dealing with the nature, have tried to overcome, try to fixing the nature. So I try to fix the nature in their own destiny, and then now or in the future they have more to come and more challenge to deal with. So that was the importance of study in environmental history in Vietnam. We see the link, we see the connection, we see the challenge. In the second part, I talk about the history of the environmental in Vietnam between 13th and 19th century. Before digging into the archive, I would like to present to you the information, what kind of knowledge, what kind of understanding, what kind of panorama we have until now. Now, from all the material, all the document, all the study have done so far, let me give you some example here. We gather dynastic archive. We have the record from European, Japanese, and Vietnamese, and we have the information related to drought, flood, famine, and epidemic between 1300 and 1750, in the 13th century and the 18th century. Here from the three rings information, we can reconstruct the precipitation in southern Vietnam from the year 1000. So this is a kind of 1000 year scale. You can see at least some of the glimpse of the fluctuation. Okay, so let's see. Even based on dynastic chronicle, we can even give you a year by year information about, natural incidents that reported in the late dynasty chronicle. You can see the number of droughts, the record of drought, and even strong winds, storm, eclipse, and insect infestation, epidemics, earthquakes, so on. And here as well, that come from the research by Catherine Dyke, and she looking at the Nguyen Dynasty documents over here between under the Duc Liem between 1848 and 1883. So you see the level of understanding, the kind of information, the kind of material, of document that to give you some understanding, some information about the past climate record in Vietnam. So what kind of document, what kind of material we have? Foremost, I think the most important we have in hand is the Imperial archives, the Imperial document. Although during the late dynasty, from the 15th century, the value, the number of document was not very much, but at least it gives you some valuable the material to look at the past, the pattern of climate, and then the environmental fluctuations in Vietnam. We have also a map, a lot of map. We mostly produce after the 15th centuries. And here an example of the maps that produced by the mid-19th century. It gives you an idea of the terrain with the river, with the seaport, with the mountain. When we look back the environmental history of Vietnam, and we look back the Imperial archive, we look back the Imperial documents, the very important character one should keep in mind is that in the traditional Vietnam, the emperor was the one who responsible for the weather because of the mandate of heaven. The emperor was the one who can connect directly with the heaven, because that's why he was called the son of the heaven. And therefore, at the Imperial, court, they have very complex structure to record all the information about natural phenomenon, especially natural incidents that considered to be strange or considered to be a blessing signal. That's why during the Lý, Trần, and Lê dynasty and the Nguyen dynasty in Vietnam, we have a lot of records that relate to climate, relate to environment. So I give you some example already with a map with the dynastic work and official map with an official report. We also have the local gazetteer and personal writings, but not really much. The second type of information comes from the National Archive, which was recently discovered and recently used by scholars. We have like coral reef and tree rings information and lake sediments and so on and so forth. And I think to deploy National Archive information, we need more collaboration. We need more, a joint research project between social scientists and natural scientists. Right. Finally, I talk about some implication on the relationship between environment and then climate and natural disaster with societies and state policy in Vietnam. We know of the past climates. We know of the past fluctuation of climates and natural challenge that Vietnamese society have to face, have to adapt, has to negotiate, and have to overcome. And then that's why, by understanding the nature, by understanding the pattern, the structure, the shifting nature of the climate and different environmental factors, it gives you a new understanding of Vietnam history. In the past, Vietnam history was understood through different angles. Especially, they have Marxist-Leninist theory, with plate Vietnamese history and the background of class struggle. And now it's time to diversify the new way of understanding Vietnamese history by looking at the pattern, the structure, the way Vietnamese and the Vietnamese state and Vietnamese society interact and deal with their own environment, deal with their own natural environment. The second thing I think is very important to have a new understanding of how human society operate with regard to different natural conditions. If you look at the Vietnamese history during the last 1,000 years, you have a group of people moved from the north to the south, from the Red River Delta with agriculture center population that moved down through the central Vietnam with the coastal area, and then it moved to, and then they moved to the highland, and then moved to the lower Mekong with a very different terrain, with very complex and a different natural condition. And the emerge of different Vietnamese group, different Vietnamese society, different Vietnamese community in different world, in different nature world. I think it's a really valuable opportunity, a valuable information, a valuable kind of example and case study for social scientists to understand how Vietnamese society was to adapt, was diversify, was try to expanding their social and political structure and economic structure over different kind of terrain, different kind of natural condition. And therefore that,
okay, Liem, it's around 15 minutes.
Can I have 2 minutes more? That will be great.
Yeah, 2 minutes, no problem.
That will be okay, fine. so that self-understanding, I think it's very important because when we look at Vietnam history, people try to think that Vietnam as a society, a village, lowlands agricultural societies, but we forgot that there are different Vietnam. That Vietnam in the mountain, the Vietnam in the sea, the Vietnam and over the river, and that gives you a more material, more information, more lesson to learn from the past that you. That's kind of experience. I think is very important in response to natural challenge today. Especially we use the local knowledge and the local tradition of dealing with the natural chain. And also the lesson of success and failure of different society as well in this background. The final example I want to give you is the dyke system. This is the single and most important example. It gives you the importance of understanding how Vietnamese interact and try to overcome the nature. For 2,000 and 3,000 years, this kind of people spend day and night, the whole life, and then society spend money and time and energy to build the dyke structure all over the place, and give us the understanding of how important it is, how challenging it is, and the lesson of success and failure of managing the environmental challenge from the social and state perspective. Okay, finally. So this gives you the state of the field of environmental study in Vietnam. As you know, it is at the beginning. If you look at the number of scholars, you look at the number of publications, it is all made clear. The potential of study in environmental history in Vietnam is huge because it has a lot of potential, a lot of material and documents, and a lot of unexplored domains that need to be shedding light on. And I think it's very important. It is significant to understand the past environmental history of Vietnam to give us a better understanding and a better policy suggestion for the future societies. And for the next step, I think Frederic, we will talk about it, and then we can have a discussion about how we can join together, we can bring together different scholars, different people from different background, and then different kind of research project to make it better and to make the field great again. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Liem. Thank you. Do I continue right now, Emmanuel? It's okay for you?
Yes.
Okay. So to start, I would like to underline after Dr. Liem that the idea of this chapter was simply to make a state of art of the research on climate history in Vietnam and of Vietnam. And I have to underline that it's quite a new issue for historians of Vietnam. As most of you perhaps have already read this chapter 2 in order to favor our exchange, I'm going to make a short intervention by simply highlighting the 3 most political points of this chapter, which are for me also 3 needs. The first one, as you see on this slide, is a need for history. The second one is a need to know the different historiographic approaches of climate history in Vietnam. And the third point is a need to pursue this chapter rapidly by setting up an interdisciplinary research program between historians and climatologists. And I have to say that the wonderful program GEM Vietnam, run by AFD, have been a starting point. And I hope it's our duty to continue the starting point by making a new collaboration, by setting up a real interdisciplinarity between a climatologist and the historian. So next slide. Thank you, Emmanuel. So the first point, the need for history. I mean the need to make climate history in order to better face the contemporary climate changes. And by saying this, I assume that we have to put ourselves, even it's very difficult for historians, in a perspective, in an utilitarian perspective. So to do this, I would start with the quote that from Parker that Liem recall also, because this quote, I would like to make a comment on this quote. What does it say? Parker says that there are two ways to prepare for the dramatic consequences of climate change in the future. The first one, the IPCC methods, which consist of running models to predict the future. And the second one, historical method, which consists to scrutinizing the past to understand the behavior of society in the face of climate change, of climatic events in the past. And Parker points out that neither method is totally reliable. It is a clear rhetorical device to place the historical approach on a par with the model of climatic scientists. So, as I know, I would probably not convincing the hard scientists who are listening to me right now with a smirk on their face, that historians have as much to say about the climatic crisis as their learned prediction. Well, I don't pretend to, and my point is a little bit different by comment this quote. If I have to rephrase this quote, I would personally avoid this comparison of the predictive quality of the two approaches and take things a little bit differently. I would rather insist on the fact that neither the two approaches belong to what the 20th century called the exact sciences, to emphasize that they belong to what the physicist or Nobel Prize winner for chemistry Ilya Prigogine with the philosopher of science Isabel Stenger have together called in a book, The New Alliance, the Metamorphosis of Science, called The Science of Complexity, as you see on the slide, which they also describe as science of uncertainty, because one of the major challenges of these sciences is precisely to make uncertainty into account in their scientific methods. If one accepts this crucial point, which every serious scientist has humbly accepted since at least 1971, because it's the date of the publication of the book of Prigogine and Stenger, then Parker's proposal is not merely rhetorical. Integrating the contribution of climate history into climate modeling should make it possible to substantially improve the description of the climatic evolution of the Earth's geosystem, a complex system if ever there is one, particularly by taking into account the behavior of society in the face of past climate change. So the idea is very serious. It's not just rhetorical idea. This is what I call the need for history. I mean, it means having the capacity to integrate observable socio-cultural behavior from the past within the different scenarios of contemporary climate change modeling to affirm these scenarios. This integration seems to me to be all the more important because one of the great characteristics of complex system is their emergent property, an irreversible property, which in the case of global warming, as you know, better than me for the scientists, will depend strongly on the individual and collective behavior of human society, which means that, next slide, yes, Manu, it was the right side, sorry. Any modeling that is poor in historical and sociological data risk missing emergent property of the social ecological system it tries to account for. However, if we look at the academic literature, it seems that one of the weaknesses of the IPCC models is precisely their failure to take these data into account, particularly at national and local scale. As early as 2007, for example, Nordas and Glenditch in this article called out the IPCC for not taking sufficiently into account in their scenario the risk of conflict linked to the climate change, which could, in their view, contribute strongly to precipitating tipping points. And more recently, I didn't quote anything, but it was in 2018, Hervé Letreux, the French climatologist, also regretted the absence in the IPCC reports, particularly the national one, of political, societal, cultural facts that would make it possible to considerably refine the various scenarios imagined and thus to better anticipate the action to be taken today. Our chapter particularly emphasized the need to take into account the national and cultural specificity of the Vietnamese society in its relationship to the climate and more generally to nature. And as this seemed to me to be a fundamental point, that is why I wanted to come back to underline it as the first fundamental point to remember from this chapter. So next slide, please. Yeah. The second point, the need to understand the method used by historians seems to me also very important. I'm going to explain why. If historians and climate scientists are to work together, both communities must make an effort to understand each other's method. Historians have to understand the specific form of the data that climate scientists need to run their models. It's an evidence, but for us, it's not so evident precisely. But climate scientists, in turn, need to understand the methods of the historians on the specific form of climate data they can dig up from the archives. Climate scientists should not ask the impossible of historians, and historians should not promise the impossible either. In short, both communities need to better understand their methods. This is the first condition before real interdisciplinary program between historians and climatologists can be considered. This is why we consider this presentation of historiographical school very fundamental to present in this chapter. And to do this, we try to make an inventory of the available archives for the very long period since the 13th century, as Liem shown, to conduct also a state-of-art survey of all climatic history study on Vietnam, even it's a quite new issue for in the historian tradition in Vietnam. It needs to be done, and to identify in this corpus the different historiographical currents that can already be identified in order to make non-historian readers understand the nature of our material and the way we work with them. Next slide, please. Oh, yes, it's okay. We have thus identified at least 4 ways of doing climate history for historiographical trends that we are taking the time to describe and characterize in the chapter. So I would sum up very quickly these 4 historiographical trends. The first one is the history of climate for the climate in the footstep of the famous French historian of climate, Emmanuel Leroy-Ladurie, sorry. It aims to reconstitute past climate according to human accounts, that means human archives, and seek a strong interdisciplinary approach with historical climatology developed by climatologists from the natural archive of the past climate, like glaciology or paleonology, that is the main proxy for climatologists to make historical climatology. This is the first type of climate history, a first step to be developed, particularly if we want to get climatologists to work with historians. And I would say this tradition is not so developed in Vietnam at the current state of art we have done. The second historiographic school has more or less the agenda of studying the influence of climatic changing on the evolution of society, and that focus particularly in Vietnam on the relation between climate change and political upheaval, but on such a large time scale that it only allows correlation between climatic and political events to put forward without providing a lot of links between the two sets of events. And it's the problem of what we are calling in this chapter a problem and the difficulty of climate determinism that we have to avoid absolutely. The third historiographic school is a cultural history of climate in Vietnam, or if you prefer, an history of the Vietnamese ideas of climate. This kind of history is very important, according to me, because far from being dead, these cultural patterns are very much alive and still strongly influence Vietnamese society on its relationship with the climate. Thus, if we want to understand how Vietnamese society is capable of coping with the various phenomena of global warming, ignoring this cultural fact is undoubtedly to deprive ourselves of an important insight into the explanation on individual and collective behavior. The fourth genre is what I call a social or a grassroots history of climate. I mean an history focusing on how people, farmers especially, react and adapt to climatic calamities. This fourth historiographic approach is not very developed in Vietnam because, and we will discuss about this with Philippe Lefayet, I hope, the Imperial annals are a constrained literary genre to leave little room for the description of everyday Vietnamese life. However, this is not the case with all the sources we have cited in this chapter. And it is certain that I'm very fan of Italian microhistoria of a village. And if Vietnamese historian could choose, for example, 18th century example of a Vietnamese commune, well chosen from archive, it would be likely to bring back valuable information on the individual and collective action of rural Vietnamese society in the face of climatic calamities. I underline in the conclusion. It's
15 minutes, but you can continue a few minutes, but not too long.
So I underline in the conclusion that no historian has yet exploited imperial annals in this sense, and I hope that this chapter will be the starting point to propose a PhD scholar for such a topic, and I would very pleased to help to set up this idea. So my third point, my third need, is the need to quickly set up an interdisciplinary research program between historians and Vietnamese meteorologists and climatologists, because as we said in France, il faut battre le fer quand il est chaud. So to do something right now, because we try to work together and we have to continue. So to be realistic, it seems prudent to start with the easiest in order to quickly demonstrate the full potential of this interdisciplinarity. From this point of view, collecting all the climatic data from the colonial period to constitute internationally recognized climate series and therefore usable by climatologists seems to be a reasonable objective within reach. This is the easiest first step. Wait a moment before the document of Yeu, please, Manuel. This is the easiest first step because the meteorological record of the colonial period and the climatic data used in the contemporary model are the same nature. They are knowledge constructed with scientific method, certainly different, but nevertheless with the instrument and recording method as this image of meteorological station of the period show. So this instrument belonging to the naturalistic ontology of modern science. So of course, this work requires the specific skill of the historians to carry out the critical work necessary to understand the context of production of this climatic information. But and now, Manu, you can display the next representation. This work is infinitely easier to carry out than the work that would have to be done to do an equivalent task on the climatic data found in the Imperial Chronicle, which I illustrate precisely here by mentioning the work of Yeo Fong in her PhD, and also the work of Catherine Dicht, which perhaps listening to us, two historians of the climate history who have already considerably advanced this sort of research. Their work shows that the climatic data of this period are based on a completely different cosmology than the cosmology of modern science, and in particular based on an analogical ontology specific to Sino-Vietnamese scholarly thought, which I felt it was important to describe the logic in this chapter precisely to highlight the challenge raised by the use of this climatic information today as a proxy for reconstructing the climatic history of the past, and to indicate that we should not expect the impossible from this data, but rather know how to exploit them in what they can tell us about the past. Hence, the importance of the third historiographical school I mentioned in my second point, namely the history of the Vietnamese idea of climate, which Yeo Fong and Catherine Dicht, I have to say, are undoubtedly opened up with their magnificent thesis. And we have to thank them for that. Next diapositive, Manu, thank you. So to come back to the easiest task from the exploratory work we have conducted in this chapter, we know it is quite feasible to link the data from the weather station of the colonial period from almost 1899 to 1954, the end of the colonization, and perhaps since 1865 for Cochinchina, with the contemporary series that GEM Vietnam project has already gathered since 1961 to the present, if I had understood well our global report. This means that almost a century's worth of climate and weather data can now be retrieved from the archives and made available for use by climatologists. Last slide, Manu. So with regard to work of standard design climate data from the colonial period, I have to say that the data quality control is an essential step to transform the historical information into useful data for climatologists. In order to be considered reliable, these data have to respect numerous criteria. I do not have time to go into detail here. These working methods have already been tried and tested in many climate data rescue projects around the world. So I will just give you a few examples of this type of project. The first one before Manu, the Duc Liem database from Météo France can be a good source of inspiration to set up these criteria to adapt them to the case of Vietnam. Remember that since 2012, the World Meteorological Organization has been developing this type of program, next menu please, throughout the world, and that since 2017, this organization has launched the International Data Rescue Initiative, IDA, an initiative that should be contacted to find funding to undertake this type of program in Vietnam. And we have to discuss about this goal. It is important in this perspective to know that the Central Meteorological Observatory in Phu Yen, created by French in 1902, is part of the Centennial Meteorological Station, today recognized by the World Meteorological Organization. This recognition is a very good indication of the feasibility of such a project. This data standardization work has been intensively implemented for Syria in Europe and United States, but we should do the same in Vietnam quite easily. The final step, next slide, would be to integrate the data we produced into a climate reanalysis program, in particularly by making contact with the European Center for Medium Range Weather Forecasts that you see here. So I explain very quickly what is a reanalysis. It is a scientific method to reconstructing the state of the atmosphere in the past from past meteorological observation. I have to extract this image from a very well-done video to understand the principle of climate reanalysis, which you can watch on the link you see on the slide. Finally, I wanted to let you know that I have set up a mission to Hanoi Archives next July, and I would be very happy to have Vietnamese researchers accompany me to introduce them to this method of works in the archives. So please write to me if you are interested in this prospect of working with me in the archives of the Center #1 of the National Archive of Vietnam in July, and particularly if you are interested in the more complex challenge of doing the same thing with the Imperial Annals. So I thank you very much for your attention. And in conclusion, I would say the last slide, let's go to work together. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe we can give the floor first to Philippe. Yes, please.
Okay, so it was interesting to hear both of you, and I just want to react as an historian. Actually, I'm not a specialist about climate topics. I didn't really work on it, but I will speak a little bit about the sources available and the way to work on it. So the idea to rewind the tape is obviously for an historian a good idea. Of course, it's my work, but we have a lot of issues to fix before considering that the data we can get from the documents are actually accurate. About the 19th century and the 20th century, there is no doubt that we can get some good information because we have a huge amount of documentation, actually. But before, this is quite difficult. This is quite difficult because there is a lack of primary sources. The 19th century, which has been a little bit studied, I read the article, rely mainly on the annals of the Nguyen dynasty. But we need to know, but obviously we know that there are not primary sources. I mean, there are people, the Mandarins working for the king that are rewriting the history of the reign, and with a special purpose. And what they note, what they quote in the documents, it's what they think is important. And I don't really think that the problem with climate, even droughts or flooding, was an important thing. It was an important thing for them, and they quoted it, if it was linked to a state reaction. For instance, they say there is a flood, and because there is a flood, the next year, this district will be exempt of taxes. So they didn't notice there is a flood just because it seems important for them to write it. But this is the administrative reaction, which is important, because this is question of money. And there is a whole array of questions. They didn't really know how to begin. Working about the annals, it's a good thing, but it's just a start. We can begin to check in the dynamic look all that kind of occurrence about draft and so on, and make some figures as we saw. Then after, the good idea will be to check on the archives, mainly Choban, which are actually primary sources that are held in center number 1 of the archives in Hanoi. The problem is this is a very huge bunch of documents in Chinese characters. So how to get information for that? Fortunately, the Vietnamese authorities decided a few years ago to make abstracts in Vietnamese of all the documents in Chinese for some purposes you can imagine. So, well, we can make some search in the computer, in the archives to know if they are speaking about that or that, but they are just abstracts. So did the guy who made the abstracts thought it was important to speak about the problems of climate? It's not sure at all. And we are just in the 19th century. So before the 19th century, about the Lei dynasty and so on, we have the annals as well, the Kongmo much smaller. And the problem is still the same. It's still the same. It's a question of filter. The history of Vietnam is just a way through. We don't have primary sources before the 19th century. Forget it. We don't have monographies. Very few of them are still there. So we just have that. And at that time, the life of the common peasant, well, considering what affected the common peasant was considering as normal, but it was something in France or in Europe or in other countries, actually. Nobody never speaks about the life of the common peasants, or very scarcely. So we got that problem, which leads that if we want to work about that kind of sources and the kind of information, we must work as historian before. Are this information reliable? Is the datation is good or not? Take an example. I take it for you. You're looking at the annals of the 19th century, all right? And they see, and you need something that can prove that the date is a good one, of course. And there are some information that you think that, well, that are for sure. For instance, eclipse. So you take your book and they say 1902, there is an eclipse. Ah, important, I noted it. So because you're a stupid French guy, you go to the NASA site because you can check all the eclipses for the past 5,000 years, and there is no eclipse that you can see in Vietnam in that year. So you take the next eclipse in 1914, something. Where are the eclipses coming from? How can you really date what happened? Is that year? Is that the year before? Is maybe somebody made a mistake somehow, somewhere? We are not sure. So if we cannot rely on that kind of documents to be sure that an eclipse occurred in that special year, how can we be sure that there were a drought that year, or not the year before, or the year after? So we must be very careful about that kind of information and to work about, first, about the sources. are the sources available? Well, can our analysis rely on that kind of information? Of course, we will try to grab all the information we can get, because actually we have very few information. So we will take everything, but we need to check and to counter-check everything. That's the purpose. Mr. Liem said, and he was right, that especially in the deltas, particularly the Red River Delta, men try to overcome the nature. And okay, the system of dyke and so on and so on. That led, in my opinion, that led to a loss of experience on how to react against extreme conditions. You make a system of dykes, so, well, it leads you to a false sense of impunity in one way. We are just at that time losing that sense of impunity because of climate change. Look at what's happening right now in the mountains. In the mountains, people say, come on, there were flash flooding last year and all the village disappeared because the river ate it. Okay, but the old people know that usually the village is in the slope, no down in the valley. For this special region, there is a loss of experience. Maybe the use of historical information and the memory in the mountains, in the villages, can help us to retrieve a little bit of the lost experience. And how did the people in the past react to extreme conditions? Okay, I won't be too long, so that if there is some question.
Okay, thank you, Philippe. Antine, want to take the floor?
Yes, can you see my slide?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, so everyone, so it's my pleasure to share with you some ideas from what I've read from the chapter 2, led by Frederic and Liem and Emmanuel. So actually, I have read with a very big interest about what you study in the COP26 report. And I think that I would like first to highlight some key points that from my viewpoint, that would be extremely interesting. So the first one, you mentioned about human and natural archive, and then the combination of both archive can give you very good knowledge about past climate. And then when you do some kind of inventories of sources of data in Vietnam, so I found that you have look carefully in the past archive to identify the different sources. And also for me, you mentioned about the political message sometimes can influence the accuracy of the data, or data will be made up for political purpose. And it would be a great interest and how people like us today can look at the different sources in the past and can well differentiate the accuracy of the data would be also my question. And then for natural archive, you mentioned about some study about dendrochronology, that means using the tree rings. And interestingly, you can find or identify a very key portions in the medieval warm period, with the wetter than average conditions, and which is similar to La Nina-like conditions. So understanding ENSO in the past would also be a very big issue that our climatologists we really want to know. And then you also mentioned on the 18th centuries, a period of extreme drought and that could be linked to the Tayson movement in that period. So of course, it is very, very difficult to isolate or to attribute the different movement in the past to climate reasons. But if climate, if we can identify how climate contribute to those past historical movement, that would be also of great interest. Okay, and then you also, in the 19th centuries, you can also see the frequent flood, tropical storm, and drought epidemic, before the eve of modernizations and Western colonization. So also those, if we have a way to look at the past and to see that from the climatological viewpoints, it would be also of great interest for me. And then you have discussed in the chapter about the contemporary climate history with the French stations, and then the first synthesis of data in 1930 and then so on after 1945. So those points I would like to highlight from your report, and then that make me to think about some question or some recommendation or some thought, based on your study. So actually, for the you mentioned a lot about human archive, and I found that for Vietnam, there not so much study about natural archive, and in your study, we have mentioned about historical record about clearings, but if we want to go further, I do think that we still need in Vietnam, Vietnamese science pictures. We still need a lot of study related to other methods, for example, lake sediment, coral ice, or pollen studies of speleothems that have never been mentioned until now. And the question, about the tree rings, when you mention about the different, the drought period in the past, you can see, the drought in this kind of 18th century here, which is linked to the Tayson movement. So my question is, the sample is taken, I don't very well remember where, but I'm not sure, whether this drought conditions is representative for the whole Indochina regions, or this, just for a very localized point where you have the trees. So I think to understand the global circulation patterns during the past could be a target for for future study. And then we know that before 1945 we have stations that Frederic already mentions, in Indochina Peninsula, and the pictures for the more modern period after 1945, you can see here, for example, here are the rainfall distributions we can collect in one of the study of my PhD student, and then you can see even for the recent period from 1958 to present, you can see that the number of stations vary a lot, and the different number of stations also can influence very much the analysis results we obtain. So Frederic mentioned about, how to do data quality controls. So I think it's not only the problem of the past, it's also the problem of today's data we have. And Liem mentioned that not so many publications have been done for the past period, and I think from my viewpoint there are many questions related to the recent period. For example, for the 1945 famine, I always have a question, about the associated climate factors during the period, and I think that's where historian and climatologists we can work together to deeply investigate the reasons or the cause of this famine or other similar disaster or phenomena. And also, coincidentally, when I'm thinking how we can link contemporary and historical climate, or how can link historian and climatologists. So Frederic mentioned about the reanalyzed data. You mentioned about the era reanalyzed data. And recently, that's the reanalyzed for the 20th century. That means you have the reanalyze the circulations of the atmosphere for the whole century, 20th centuries. So you can go into the detail of the atmospheric circulations in the past. And those reanalyzed data is, I think, is very valuable resource for us to investigate or to understand the past, you know, where for the period when we don't have yet maybe the station data at many places. So this some direction that our group also we are trying to work on the reanalysis of the 20th centuries, or more in the 17th or 18th centuries. We can also make some kind of simulation of the past, and we call the paleoclimate simulation. That the model can run for 1,000 years, and then we can still investigate. You know, for example, the drought condition during the 18th century, you know, can be linked to some ENSO-like patterns or not. And another point that could be related to what Frederic mentioned for his trip in July. I have tried to look at the past data for the period 1900 to 1945. And what I can have is the monthly data, you know, in the different bulletin. But from my viewpoint, for extreme event, we really need daily data, climate daily data, and then I think that's where we need the support from the historian. You know, monthly data is okay if those kind of natural disaster or event last for enough long time, but if we are looking at the typhoon or some event like flooding things, so I think monthly data is not enough. So we do need to have those kind of daily data and or daily impacts supported from the historian. And you know, to finalize, I would like to give one example that I like very much. That means it's a Japanese study. They study the full flowering date of sakura in Japan, and you can see that, you know, from the human archive, they can they can have the full flowering date correctly from the year 800 to present, and you can see the flowering date, you know, very good time. And from that, they do some kind of interpolation or statistical relationship in order to convert the flowering date to the March mean temperature. And then you can see how climate, you know, changed in the past. And that's something I'm not sure, you know, if we can. I see that you, for example, Lien and all, you have obtained many data from the 13th centuries to the recent period, and whether we can, you know, do some kind of statistical relationship between your historical archive with climate things. So those study is very meaningful, and it's a great interest for the community, I think. So last but not least, I would like just to highlight, you know, these sentences. The further what you can look, the further for what you are likely to see. Then we are very much ready for collaboration, and here is the lab. We are working with the different researchers, and we are, you know, very much warmly want to collaborate with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tyne, for your very interesting comments. So maybe the participants, the attendees, someone want to ask something or to make a comment? If you want, please raise a hand and we will give you the floor. I don't know if Catherine is still here. I think, yes, Catherine, you can go. You have the floor. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. And yeah, thank you very much for a really interesting seminar and for your very generous appraisal of my historical research, Frederic. Yeah, I'd just like to, respond a bit to Philip about his discussion of the challenge of kind of working with these 19th century sources and his comment about how, the meteorological record only appears when there's a kind of state response. Because I kind of looked at the dynamical look quite a lot in the vertical records in my own research. And it's really kind of peculiar because often, yes, there is, an incident of natural disaster occurs and there is a state response and it is documented. But there's also kind of these examples where, sandwiched in between, very long kind of other events, you just get that there was a flood somewhere or that there was a typhoon somewhere, and there's no, reaction really from the court. It's just kind of appearing, within a kind of long list of other data. So it's kind of interesting for that reason. Why is it kind of occurring in the record? Obviously it's been put in by historians at a much later date, as you mentioned, and synthesized, partly also drawing on those Choban reports that you mentioned. And that's why it's really interesting. I worked a little bit with those archival documents in archive number 1 in Hanoi, and it is a real challenge because, as you said, they're copious, they're in classical Chinese. It takes a really long time to go through them, but you can often see quite a lot of correspondence between what actually does appear in the Dynamic Look and in the Choban. And then it's kind of, it kind of really validates that entry, I guess. The historians working later, obviously, were drawing on the Choban reports quite a lot. And so I think that these sources do kind of have a use. And I guess I was just thinking about this idea as well, that there was no real kind of meteorological service which existed before the French came along, before the kind of end of the 19th century, before the 20th century, when they set up their stations and they could really kind of, pull together all this climatic information. But in fact, we do see in the 19th century that, at a very local level, officials were tasked with the responsibility of making weather diaries, of documenting rainfall, of using all kinds of instruments like bowls and sticks to actually kind of measure rainfall and various aspects of climate. And these were being kind of channeled to the court, and the court, the Kamtianzam, the observatory there, were tasked with the responsibility of kind of synthesizing this information and making climatic calendars for the entire year, which were then distributed throughout the realm. So maybe we need to kind of rethink what we think of as a kind of a valid meteorological record for the period, if we're going to kind of use this data in the 19th century. And so that's just one thing I was thinking about. But thank you again for a really engaging and thought-provoking seminar. Really, really glad to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you a lot, Catherine. Dr. Liem, Frederic, Philippe, you want to say something about the comments, or someone else among the participants?
Yes, thank you for your nice comment, everyone. I would like to say that from this short discussion, we see how the challenges are huge. Thank you, trying to underline that Asian society, the example of Japan observation of the blowing of cherries is a very good example, because we see that there is, as Catherine said, there is many proxy to have climatic information, but it's very difficult to use it to to transform this information into something that we will match with exact science. But as I said in my introduction, we know that climatic science, climatologist modeling science are not so exact science, but as I would say, complex science. And that is why to make the effort to find a different solution, to put this information, this clue in usable tools for climatologists is of course challenging, but we have to try to do our best. I remember to read, perhaps Catherine, you will help me. I don't remember the name of this article. In Japan, they also register holds the date of the first frozen on a lake. And thanks to this, they also have long series of climatic information. And to come back to Emmanuel Leroy-Ladurie, one of the first challenge was to say for palynology information on the windward in France, one of the most challenging things was how to transform this sort of information from each windward into a modern climatic information, as you need to be a climatologist at the same time, a good historian, and also a good test whiner who know perfectly each windward, also to understand the subtle way to transform this information into a climatic information. But this topic is quite new in Vietnam. And when we start, I am not an historian of climate, I have to say. I am a historian of science, more focused on gene property. But I would say, if I answer positively to the proposal of Etienne Espagne in the program GEM, I think it's a very exciting new program of research in history in Vietnam. And I would say that one of the problems is to find in the archive a good proxy on which to invest a lot. But that is why we need to work collectively. And thank you very much, Tang, for the proposal you have underlined in your special need. And to answer to one of your question, I can promise you, as I said, that we will find daily information to complete the publication of the climatic colonial from the colonial period in Bulletin économique de l'Indochine, or this bulletin something like summary of monthly information of the 20 stations. But I'm sure if we go in the archives, we will have what Philip called primary sources, and perhaps in these primary sources we won't have a complete daily series you hope, but perhaps we will enhance our information. So thank you very much for your comment.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. I think Philip and then Thang and Catherine have given a lot of interesting way to look at the topic, because we all know that this is a new frontier among the Vietnamese social scientists. And the second thing is we talk about how to make two connections. The first one is to connect the traditional cosmology and traditional information, traditional science from science to more contemporary and the modern scientific information. That it's a huge challenge. The second thing is how to connect the information about climate and environment and political and social evolution. 2 years ago, I presented a paper. Manuel and Frederic were there, and I talk about early 19th century Vietnam peasant rebellions in the Red River Delta. Phan Ba Vàng and a lot of people revolt against Minh Mạng emperor, and it's only one uprising. I only found the direct connection, between the flooding situation and the rebellions. Otherwise, it's completely silence. So I think we need a kind of interdisciplinary approach historian and social scientists, we can't do anything, without, a systematic approach and a lot of data and a lot of connections. So I think it's a starting point, very important to look at the information from the past and how we can expand, how we can make connection, how we can make use of historical information in a wider interdisciplinary research. So you guys have any experience? You guys have any suggestion? You guys have any from their own perspectives and for their own experience? Because this is quite a new challenge for the young Vietnamese historians. The first step to enter the field. Frederic, Philip, Thành, Catherine, or Manuel. What kind of suggestion? What kind of? I think Philip, raise the hands.
Yeah. If I may say something. So now we are reading again the old documents and the war history of Vietnam and other countries, and we are a little bit starting to rethink the world history through the climate events, which could be a good idea, but that's not sure at all. For instance, we must take care and not make shortcuts, and to say, okay, there is a now we can assume that there is a drought or flooding or something that lead to famine, so that lead to uprising, and so on and so on and so on, which is not always the case. What we know about uprisings and revolts, they are always multifactorial. There are always multiple different reasons. For instance, there were someone was speaking about the year 1945. Okay, now in 1945 there were typhoons. So typhoons in the north, so bad harvest. So that lead to what? Bad harvest lead to famine, the big ones for sure, and to the revolution of 1945. No, it was World War II, so the South cannot provide rice for the North because the railroad has been destroyed by American bombings and so on. So, it's never that easy. So never jump. So about making a link between uprisings and the climate events, it's not always a good idea. It's not always a good idea to jump to conclusions.
A very short note for the 1945 famine. Traditionally, by the 19th century, if in perfect condition, there's flood in the northern Vietnam, and the Nguyen government can mobilize the rice from the southern Vietnam, there should be no problem. And traditionally, and in the past, I have a lot of experience that the way the Imperial government, they send the rice from the central Vietnam and from the lower Mekong to the north for social benefits, and there should be no problem if the government can handle that. And of course, the American bombing the system and the World War II situation may cause the problem, plus the flooding situation as well. There's a short note on the 1945.
Okay, thank you, Liem. There is a question in the question box. Maybe, Liem, you have some insight on the problem is to focus on the study of Vietnam authorities' reaction against big natural disaster in history, which is a promising direction. And many of us would love to know how Vietnamese authority made big decisions in this kind of disaster situation in the past, what had been done, are there big investments, and how these investments have been conducted, for example. So it's a huge question, but if you have maybe some reference or just an example to show how the Vietnam's authority respond to big natural disaster in the past, what have been.
Well, thank you. I think the question is very interesting and very important. There are two forms of studying how past society interact or respond to natural challenge. I think from the top down, you have the government policies and how the way government direct social resources and money and energy to construct, for example, dyke system and how to respond to natural challenge. Under the bottom up, you have the different form of local knowledge and local communities, how they deal with climatic challenge or natural disaster. So I think that to form a knowledge and information, to form a pattern, a part society deal with natural challenge is equally important. Other question: how Vietnamese government deal with the crisis situation caused by a natural disaster. Now, when we look back at Vietnam history, the response is various in terms of prosperity. In terms of we have a strong emperor, the emperor can mobilize the political and social system for in response to a natural disaster. For example, in Lê Thánh Tông period, and here, when you have a strong government, you have a good national treasure, and they have your money, you have grain, you have rice, you have people available for the task. So that should be no problem at all. But when you have a crisis, political crisis or economic crisis or social violence, it's much more challenging, it's much more difficult for the government to mobilize people, mobilize resources, and mobilize social relief to the region that destroyed by natural hazards. I think the a very important example we can find is 19th century and how the Nguyen dynasty deal with the situation in northern Vietnam. It's strange when 19th century is the period when people rebel, the French invaded, and the Red River Delta caused 40, 50, 60 floods during 19th centuries. That's kind of crazy. There was no century before that we witnessed the scale of floods that much. And it's got a lot of problems for the Nguyen dynasty. The Nguyen dynasty has the huge debates almost every year. They debate about how to fix the dyke system, how to fix the flooding situation in Hanoi, and they fail over and over, and it caused trouble for the government because they spend a lot of money, they spend a lot of resources, they spend a lot of human power in addressing the flooding situation in Hanoi, and they almost they have exhausted, and they have no energy, no reserve left for the task against French invasion. That's part of the equation, that part of the game I want to suggest. So in short, I think yes, it is important to look at how the state in Vietnam respond to natural challenge, and of course it can give us a lot of valid information today, and how the government in Vietnam can learn from their past experience, which I think, especially in the lower Mekong, it will be a huge challenge for the Vietnam government today. So in Thành,
very much, Liem. So normally,
Anh Thành, we would like to add something about the contemporary situation and how the Vietnamese government today, dealing with the situation. That will be connecting the dots.
Actually, it's okay for me now. Okay, thanks for your sharing and the question. Yeah.
Okay, so officially it's the end of the webinar today, but do someone want to add a concluding remark or a last comment before we separate and we meet again for the huge program that Frederic, Tine, Liem prepared to do for the future. Frederic, you want to add something to conclude?
No, I would like to say that this seminar, this session of the seminar was, I think, important to relaunch a dynamic together. And I hope that the easiest task I was talking about, that I think it's quite easy to reach, will start this summer. And as I said, that I would like to contribute with many scientists and also historians in Vietnam. But the last slide of Tang shows us a very big human resources willing to work together. So I'm very happy of that. And we will see how to set up this in real time. Thank you very much, all of you.
Okay, thank you, Philippe. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Catherine, for being today to discuss. Thank you a lot, Frederic and Liem, for your presentation. Everyone, every participant to join today. And let's meet next week for the next session of the GEM webinar about macroeconomic and climate adaptation in Vietnam.
Thank
you.
You
And goodbye. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.